Hi guys, thanks for joining me this month on Blister Prevention Office Hours. We might make a start. We're just doing pure Q&A today, so if anyone's on the call and you have a question, then feel free to put your mic on and ask, or just pop it in the chat box and we'll get to it at the end. I've had 6 questions submitted beforehand, so we've got some good topics. So if you're watching the recording of this, the topics that we're going to be discussing lacing, taping, running, hiking, school shoes, and interdigital blisters. So if any of those things interest you, then stick around basically. So let's get started with Dan's question. Dan asks, boot lacing, tight or loose, or does it depend? Well, I really can't think of a single instance where it's a good idea to have loose lacing. I mean, I would always go, maybe not tight, but at least firm. Firm doesn't need to mean uncomfortable. Firm should mean, if anything, very comfortable. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to have excess movement of the foot relative to the shoe. So that's why it's always important to lace firmly. Now, there are some lacing techniques that you can use with boots and shoes if the tightness is an issue. And a couple of those is, this one here is all about having like a dorsal midfoot nerve compression or just a bony exostosis that's kind of painful to tight lacing. Well, just skip it. Instead of crossing the laces over, just go down 1 or 2 eyelets without crossing, and then start your crossing over again. And that just keeps the boot firm on your foot, but without the tightness on those tender areas. The other one is number 2 here, is for if there's a tibialis anterior irritation. The left side here is the big toe side, the medial side. And we just kind of lace it like this, so there's a little bit less pressure over that part of the anterior tibial tendon. And of course, there's the heel lock. Heel lock is really common in running shoes. I've actually got a couple of links here that I can give you, some good videos on YouTube for boots particularly, because it's they're less likely available. Bear with me. And here's the other one from profoot.co.uk. Both good videos. If you're watching the recording, I'll have this somewhere in the description or the blog post. So yeah, that's boot lacing. Definitely firm. We need to benefit. Our foot needs to benefit from the support of the footwear, but also the more relative motion of the foot relative to the shoe is not advantageous. It's a bad thing. Okay, moving on to question number 2. Ronnie asks, tape or not? Well, yes, if someone comes to you and they haven't tried taping before, definitely give it a go, because for a lot of people, taping is all they need. And those people are generally people that only need a little bit of prevention power. So either they're relatively resistant to blisters just generally, and their activity is there's not really any endurance component. But the fact of the matter is, taping is often not enough for other people that are a bit more blister prone, or they have an odd foot shape that just can't get perfect shoe fit, or their activity involves like an endurance component. But thankfully, it's not all about tape. There's way better, arguably, ways to reduce the magnitude of shear deformation and therefore blisters. So just know that there are other options. People that find it hard to get past the whole taping idea are just people generally that think that blisters are caused by rubbing. Now, they might say friction, but what they mean is actually rubbing. Blisters aren't caused by anything rubbing over the skin, at least not foot friction blisters. They're caused by the skin and the shoe and the sock and the floor keeping in relatively stationary contact while the bones move back and forth in the foot. So tape doesn't eliminate shear. If you don't believe me, then after this video, put a bit of tape on the back of your hand. Before you do that, just show yourself and make sure you can feel what shear is. Okay, that's shear in the skin and soft tissues in the back of my hand. And then put a bit of tape on and do it again. And you'll feel that there's still shear underneath there. So it doesn't eliminate shear. It will eliminate rubbing, but rubbing's not the issue. It won't eliminate shear. And so there are other things that we can use. I hear a lot of people or podiatrists sort of doubling down on, oh, well, it must have been your taping technique. It's often not taping technique. It's not like you've got magical powers and can, you know, put this tape on without creases. And magically that will make tape 100% effective. If only it was that simple. Sure, sometimes our patients do a pretty dodgy job of taping, and yeah, sometimes that can lead to blisters, but more often than not, it's not the technique itself. And if you want to learn about the research around taping, I did a whole webinar on with our free CPD course. So it's a recorded webinar, and I've got the link for that too. It's a free little mini course. So jump over to this link here and you can listen to that webinar. And there's also like a download, a patient handout download that you can use. Essentially, there's two pieces of research about taping. One found it didn't work, and then the next one found that it did work. And both of those pieces of research were on paper tape. So, but anyway, I spent like a full half hour talking about taping in this webinar. So go and have a look at that. And just to put the nail in the coffin for rubbing causes blisters, and therefore the answer is to eliminate rubbing. These are all the mechanisms of blister prevention. And nowhere on here is anything about rubbing. So the way that tape works is it spreads shear load over a large area. Tape, moleskin, Compeed used as a, or any hydrocolloid used as a prevention, they just spread shear load over a larger surface area, thereby reducing it per unit area, reducing its peak. Rightio, the next three questions are all about the best blister prevention. I just want to set the scene for these questions because this is an impossible question to answer. Like, I literally don't have an answer. So rather than ask what's the best blister prevention going around, or what's the best blister prevention for X activity, running, walking, boxing, ballet, football, whatever, instead ask, what's the best prevention for X anatomical location? This little flip is the best thing that you can do. It'll lead to better blister outcomes for your patients, and because you'll just be able to give them more specific advice that's going to be helpful for them. It's a sure sign that someone doesn't understand blisters when they have firm answers to those questions. And generally those answers are either, oh, your shoes, it's the wrong shoe fit. So your shoe's not fitting properly. Good luck with that. Bear with me a sec. They don't even really have a look, but they just say, yeah, your shoe doesn't fit, go and get a new pair. Well, what exactly are you looking for? Where does my shoe not fit? And what am I looking for when I go to buy my next pair, so that I don't make the same mistake? Or they'll say it's just the wrong shoe, often without really looking about what's wrong with this shoe for my foot. And even worse is if they say you need X brand and style of shoe. And if you've got 20 people, they would say the exact same brand and style of shoe for all 20 people, which is just rubbish. Broad sweeping comments about specific sock brands, also unhelpful, means that you don't really understand blisters. Taping is not about rubbing. There's better ways and more effective ways to reduce the magnitude of shear deformation in the skin and soft tissue than just taping. Taping doesn't work for a lot of people. One particularly unfair piece of advice that people get, particularly runners, is that they haven't put the miles in to either toughen their skin or to become fit enough such that they don't lose form in the latter stages of their running. It's really, really massively unhelpful, demoralizing for your patient, and inaccurate. Just because someone loses form, which a lot of runners do if they're really exerting themselves just to get the best times and, you know, all the rest of it, it doesn't mean they're destined to have a running career with blisters. So we got to snap out of that and really insert any specific strategy. If that's someone's answer to all blisters, then you know that they don't really know what they're talking about. So rather than ask what's the best blister prevention or what's the best blister prevention for X activity, instead ask what's the best prevention for X anatomical location, and then nuance it to the activity. It's the best way to go. It's the most helpful and enlightening way to go. Every blister is caused by repetitive shear deformation in the skin and soft tissue. However, that doesn't mean that there's a single prevention strategy that's better than the rest for every part of the foot. It just doesn't exist, okay? To minimize shear, you have to think about, and if you get the opportunity, look at and examine their foot, their structure and the function of that anatomical site. Because remember, shear deformation is generated from bone movement within the foot. It's not something rubbing against the skin. The skin is still, it's in stationary contact with the sock and the shoe, or at least it's in stationary contact for a long time. But the bones are moving back and forth. That's the driver of shear, okay? So we've got to think about how those bones move in that person at that anatomical site, and then we factor in for the activity. So basically, this is the slide, the takeaway slide that I want you to remember. Out of all the others, it will really, really help you in the advice that you can give your patients in regard to blisters. So having set the scene, Caesar asks runners, and I'm assuming Caesar's asking about what's the best prevention for runners. But if you get on the call, Caesar, and I'm incorrect, then feel free to pipe up. We now know this is an impossible question to answer. We've got to first know whereabouts on the foot this blister is to be able to give you the best advice. And then obviously if you get the chance to examine within the confines of a consultation, all the better. And then we nuance it to the activity. Now, one thing I want you to think about with running is prevention's mega important because, number one, they don't have the ability or often the willingness to stop and do anything about it. And even if they did, they're not carrying any gear or they don't have access to gear. So nailing prevention's massively important for runners. And once we know where it is on the foot, obviously we then, you know, nuance it for the specifics of their running. And all of these things can potentially change the prevention that you choose. So let's, if we take, for example, socks, if it's going to be cold, you'd probably opt for a woolen sock. If it's going to be hot and sweaty, then you probably go for a moisture wicking. And if your foot's going to be submerged and get waterlogged, you might opt for maybe even a waterproof sock, at least for a time. They get very hot, but at least it will keep the moisture, external moisture, out of away from your skin, or even an armor skin sock. So the armor skin sock doesn't hold any water. Imagine if you go through a river crossing in a wool or synthetic sock, there's going to be a degree of, you know, absorption of that moisture in the sock. So you might opt for and further, it will really increase friction levels. So the armor skin sock might really come into its own. It's a inner of a double sock mechanism where you use any other sock over the top of it, but a lot of times you can just use the armor skin sock. And I would think about this if you are going to be encountering river crossings. And as another example, let's say you've got a runner who has particular trouble with lateral fifth toe blisters. Anything less than a multi-day race, you probably maybe opt for a gel toe sleeve. They can be fantastic. They're fantastic for lots of toe blisters, not all of them, but lots of them. However, when I'm at ultra marathons, particularly the 6 days, in the latter half of those events, swelling becomes such a component that it really limits what we can get into the shoe in the toe box area in regard to blister prevention. So often we'll try and, instead of absorbing shear with the gel, we'll get all the prevention we can out of that. And then when it can no longer fit in there because it just tightens everything up too much, then we'll go with Engo patches on the side of the shoe lining. So we're no longer absorbing shear, we're reducing the coefficient of friction and just letting that sock slip and slide over that area so that shear deformation is minimized. Make sense? One thing I also want to just mention here is, although it's not really about prevention because we're talking about treatment, but prevention is massively important during blister treatment. If you want to really affect brilliant blister treatment, the type of treatment that takes away the pain and allows the blister to begin healing, even though your runner has to keep running on this blister. Or at least not getting progressively worse the more they run. Now, it might not be as important in anything under a marathon distance. Generally, people will just, you know, run through it and deal with the blister carnage in the coming days afterwards. But if this person is in a multi-day event, then it's massively important that we can minimize the pain in that blister and stop it from getting progressively worse, if not allowing it to start healing by implementing the blister prevention that should have been there in the first place, because that's the bit that minimizes shear deformation. Without minimizing shear deformation, the blister is going to get worse. Remember, it's not just about covering the blister and stopping the rubbing, it's about minimizing shear deformation. So it's your betadine and Band-Aid, which is the first aid, plus the blister prevention to implement really helpful blister treatment. And finally, another little tidbit is, if you have a runner come into you and say, look, I just want to know about how to prevent blisters. Well, you know, we've already established it's not about the event itself or the activity itself. We need to know the anatomical location. So rather than getting all tongue-tied and not knowing where to start, this is how you hone in on blister location. You ask about their blister history. The most likely blister they'll get is the one they've had before. So runners, especially if they're training for an event that's really important for them and they want to do the best that they possibly can, your job is to give them the best advice. So you hone in on their blister history, you tell them to expect to get that blister, and you show them or provide them with the information that they need or the products that they need to take that blister out of the equation before it even starts. So you have that prevention at the start line, if not in training, because the last thing you also need is a nasty blister in the latter stages of your training regime. And then it just kind of, I get a lot of people, runners email me and they're really at their wits' end. They don't know whether to take a few days off their training, even though they're heading towards their taper, or whether just to get through it and then hope that during the taper their blister heals enough. So yes, focus on their blister history, take them out of the equation by implementing the best prevention right from the get-go. Have a look for any areas of callus. Callus and blisters are caused by the same thing, which is repetitive shear deformation. Callus is the chronic manifestation where the skin has time to kind of adapt. It thickens. And blisters are the acute manifestation where there is no time for adaptation, and so we get that intraepidermal tear, which is the initiation of the blister injury. And I would just also expect to get blisters there. They're a sign. They're a sign, and if you ignore it, it's just silly. You're just really asking for trouble. So take them out of the equation, have the prevention in place. Don't just get rid of the callus. The callus itself is not necessarily the problem. The callus is a sign that this is an area that undergoes repetitive shear deformation day in, day out. And of course, you can do a podiatric examination to further hone in on any areas that you think that they might be susceptible. So, Caesar, I hope that answers your question. Let's move on to Joe's question. What's the best prevention strategies for hikers? Well, we know this is an impossible question to answer. We first need to know whereabouts on the foot we're talking about. And then we hone in during our examination and we have a look at how that bone works, any bony prominences, large joint ranges of motion, that kind of thing. But even without the consultation, I mean, I've built a business on obviously having a podiatric background and just getting information external to a consultation, knowing where the blister is on the foot to help people match the best prevention to that. There are times, and these are particularly blisters across the ball of the foot, that really there's a lot of variables and really need podiatric examination. And of course, I always tell people to go and see their podiatrist so that they can really nail in the specifics for this blister location. But yeah, we've got to know where it is on the foot first things. Nuancing it to the activity. The interesting thing, or the unique-ish thing about hiking, is they're generally carrying a backpack, and that's cool because they can carry gear in there. They generally got somewhat of a first aid kit, hopefully even a blister kit, but if not, at least some really good components in their first aid kit to make it a great blister kit as well. And they can carry extra socks, which can make a bit of a difference, particularly on multi-day hiking. And then, of course, we further nuance it for the specifics of this hiking trip. So if we think about, I don't know, like a weekend hiking trip with a friend, and someone gets blisters under the plantar forefoot, and their normal strategy might be felt deflective padding held down with some Fixable. So that's well and good. You probably have room for an extra bit of felt and an extra bit of tape, and you take that in your backpack, no problem. But if you're doing something that is much longer than that, a week long, and plus you've got to carry all your food and you've got to carry everything, and then there's situations like the Camino. Camino is normally around about a 30-day thing that people do, and they are ultra focused on ultra light packing. So they cut the handle off a toothbrush kind of thing and just take the little bit at the end. So they're not going to want to take a bit of felt and a bit of Fixable for every day that they've got to replace their padding. So in these situations, we want less consumable products. So we might opt for something like an Engo patch under the ball of the foot on the insole, or maybe even an armor skin sock, because with the Engo patches, that will last 30 days, assuming that the boot does or the shoe doesn't get waterlogged. So you don't need any extra. And even if you did take one extra rectangle patch, it takes up next to no room. So yeah, small price to pay. And then similarly, an armor skin sock, it's really no extra weight because you're wearing the thing. And with your Engo patch, it's already on your insole. So again, you don't actually need to take anything. You're wearing it. So that kind of thing, that might impact on what prevention we choose for a particular anatomical location. We might want less consumable, less bulky, and something that lasts longer. Again, how important is pain relief and healing when we have to keep hiking day after day? I would say massively important for those multi-day hikes. So we've got to have the prevention implemented at the time of treatment to affect these important things of healing and pain relief. So really, why not have it in place at the start? And the reason people don't have it in place at the start is they don't do the research, or they haven't come to see their podiatrist, or their podiatrist hasn't given the information, like honing in on their blister history and the areas of callus that they've got, which is the low-hanging fruit. Massively important. If someone just comes in and says, look, I really just want to know, I've got this important, I'm going on a holiday, I'm going to be hiking with my family, or I'm training for the Boston Marathon, or whatever it is, this is what you've got to cover. And it is really helpful to you, because instead of just trying to rattle off numerous preventions, hone in, get specific. Emily asked about the best prevention for kids with new school shoes, even when those shoes have been fitted correctly. Well, again, impossible question to answer because we need to know whereabouts on the foot this blister is. But if we nuance it to the activity, or at least this patient cohort, kids, I think it's fair to say they often don't do laces up very firmly, particularly the young kids, and it can be difficult. Like they might do a nice firm knot, but then the bow kind of all comes undone a little bit, and a lot of kids just kind of slip their shoes off and then slip their foot back in again the next day, and so we haven't really optimized lacing firmness. Some kids have limitations with the socks that they can wear, and you know there might be developmental issues. I mean, if we think about blisters at the back of the heel, my go-to for that would be an Engo patch on the back of the shoe. And I'd also optimize lacing, yeah, because when you allow the heel to slip up and down at the back of the shoe, it's even more important that the laces are keeping the foot in the shoe, yeah, that's keeping the foot stable. So Engo patch and firm lacing every single time is what would be the best prevention in my opinion. However, it's probably not the go if kids don't want to do their laces up, or they like to have them all loose. You know how they do a thing and they just tuck them in without actually doing a knot even? Yeah, then an Engo patch, especially when they just shove their heel in, the sock is going to catch the top of the patch. It's going to drag it down bit by bit. The patch might last a day. It might last a week. If you're lucky, it might last a term, but it should last probably the duration of that shoe for that kid. They'll probably grow out of it when used correctly. So instead what you might be needing to revert to is things like a couple of layers of taping, maybe a thick, densely padded sock around the back of the heel. And if they have a uniform that they've got to abide by, well, you can theoretically put that underneath the uniform sock, and you might even get them started on calf stretches if they've got tight calves. So we're trying to minimize that movement of the foot relative to the shoe, assuming they've got an early heel lift. So yeah, that's what you might need to revert to. Now, once they get sort of sick of putting the taping on every day and they can't get into the habit of doing the calf stretches, they might actually be happy to revert back to the Engo patches and the firm lacing, and it might solve their problem that way. So you might need to just give them a go at that. Let them know there's something better that you can try if that doesn't work out, and you're prepared to sort of change the way you do things. Again, if the child has a lot of pain in a blister, then we've got to implement the prevention anyway. So if you've got a child that's really protesting, this is how you take the pain out of the blister. Essentially, you put the prevention in that ideally you just keep in from then on. And of course, if you have a parent that brings a child in and just wants to know how to prevent blisters, hone in on the blister history. I'd like to think they don't have any callus, but maybe they do. You know, because that's the thing with runners, hikers, school kids, you'll often see them, they don't actually have a blister yet, or their blister has healed. So that's why you've got to hone in on blister history. I hope that makes sense, Emily. Question 6 is from Cameron, and it's a brilliant question. What's the best tips? What are the best tips and devices for blisters between the hallux and the second toe? Brilliant question. Love it. All right. Relevant factors. Any or all of these could be relevant. Bunions, overriding second toe, functional structural hallux limitus or rigidus, out toeing such that they kind of roll off that big toe and it squishes the big toe against the second toe, and the shoe fit relative to their foot shape. So yeah, just have a look at what the relevant factors are. If you ask me what the best preventions are, I think gel toe protectors are great for interdigital blisters. They're almost always comfortable, and if we've got room in the shoe, in the toe box, then it's an easy fix. They're reusable as well. So yeah, they're a really good option. Let me just skip the second one there. Injinji toe socks is the next one. Injinji toe socks make a big difference to the interdigital space because normally it's a skin-skin interface, but all of a sudden with toe socks, you've got 2 layers of socks in there. So you've got a double sock mechanism, you've got cushioning, and you've got moisture management that isn't normally there. So that alone can make a big difference. If we think about the toe sock as a whole, we're also adding essentially 6 layers of sock in those other interdigital spaces that has to exist within the toe box of the shoe. So we might not have room, but in essence, toe socks can make a big difference to interdigital blisters for sure, and even some pinch blisters. Now, the reason I've got toe socks and an Engo patch in there is it is a brilliant fix. It's a bit off script for Engo patches because you're meant to use them on a spot where they can just stay kind of forever or for weeks or months at a time, which is not a sock because it'll come off once it gets in the wash with the soapy waterlogging. But in ultramarathon, where someone has a real disposition for pinch blisters or interdigital blisters, when they've already got a blister and we've got to take the pain out of that and we've got to stop it from just getting worse and worse, wrapping an Engo patch around the toe of that toe sock makes the biggest difference. It just allows easy slipping and sliding. So by reducing that coefficient of friction, it reduces the shear within that skin and can be the number of times that I mean, I'd be lost without it, basically. So if someone isn't wearing toe socks, it's not an option because there's nowhere to put it in between the toes. And if everything's wet, so when it rains at an ultramarathon, it is really tricky because I can't use Engo patches altogether. So we're having to, and assuming people haven't thought ahead and got armor skin socks, then we're having to use lubricants and powders and just reapplying frequently. Waterform devices can be fabulous, there's no doubt. For runners, you'll get a bit of pushback. They will just think, oh, no, there's no way I'm going to handle that. More often than not, they do, but sometimes not. So, but for walking, generally, they go really well. Lubricants can be really good. They need reapplication because after a while, friction levels increase. Maybe around about the 2-hour mark. Really, the research hasn't been done, but the lab studies indicate that. And taping can make a bit of difference. So if you just need a little bit of prevention power, taping can be great. Don't just do taping. If that doesn't work, Barley's not helpful. We really need to, implement one of those others. Oh, and there is another less common cause of proximal interdigital blisters right in that web space. And that is a plantar distal forefoot blister. And what happens there is the cause is actually at the ball of the foot. So it's under the met heads or the metatarsal phalangeal joints. And because that's such a high weight bearing area, the blister fluid gets pushed distally. And so you can see these blisters sort of up at the base of the toes. And if it keeps going and there's more and more blister fluid, it actually creeps up and appears in between the toes. So that's one to look out for because a lot of people think, oh, I'm dealing with an interdigital blister. But actually, you've got to deal with whatever prevention you need to implement back down there under the ball of the foot. If you happen to be in Blister Prevention University, this is the lesson for that blister, and we go through the preventions. So guys, that is it. I don't have any questions in the chat box. I'll just wait a second, and if you've got a question, type it in and I'll answer it. That's that slide I want you guys to remember. It's the most helpful way of thinking about blisters and addressing blisters, particularly when a patient comes in and just says, I want to know how to prevent blisters in my running. You got to hone in on the anatomical site. All right, guys, we're going to wrap it up. So thank you for joining me, either live, if you're live, or watching the replay. Office hours isn't going to be on in January, but in February, it's going to be a ripper. I'm going to go through all the ins and outs about posterior heel blisters because it's something that trips people up, and it's probably one of the most common blister sites there is. So we're going to talk about the lot. It's going to be the full half hour on posterior heel blisters. So watch out for that. And until then, take care. Have a great Christmas. See you in the new year.